Welcome back. For the month of August, we will feature a woman of special interest every Wednesday as our crush in celebrating Women's Month. Tonight, for a woman in entertainment, we put our spotlight on published poetess Frieda Etuhole. Good evening and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much
for being here.
Yes, the one person that's mostly excited about this interview is my friends are more excited than I am.
Nah, are you nervous?
Not really. I actually thought I would be a bit shaky, but I think
I would be shaky if I had to deliver a poem on national TV.
Now that you mentioned that,
we'll talk a bit to get you settled and get you calm before that happens. No? Frieda, on social media, you not only describe yourself, of course, as a poet, poetess. There's a lot there that describes you. So tell us about this all-encompassing Frieda Etuhole and the roles that she takes up.
So apart from being a poetess, I'm a content writer, an editor, an activist, feminist, if you might call it that. But being all roundup, I'm an academic at heart. I love academia so much, and I think my friends every other day they ask me whether I'm not tired of studying. But I actually really love studying, and languages are my specialty. So being an editor and a content writer, I mean, in high school, I actually wanted to really mention this. In high school, my friends would give me their essays to edit and work, go through it. I think at first it's something that I really loved, but in high school you had to find something to brag about. So being able to do that was one thing that I could really, really brag about. And coming to university, I studied language and literature studies. So everything like content writing and editing came very easy for me.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think that's who I am in a nutshell, if I could say that, apart from doing poetry. A creative, I think people say creative is such a big umbrella.
It is, and I love it.
And the same. So being under being the creative, I think now the poetry is what I am. Activism is what I am, because most of my poetry is activist based. And then the editing. But the editing is more the serious me, because then I work with corporate clients, so now I have to be like put on a very professional kind of hat. But being the creative, I love being fun. I love content writing. So I write for Sister Namibia on their women-related issues, New Era, anything women-related, you'll find
you
me.
You are the gal.
I'm the gal. I'm the go-to person.
You're currently in school as well.
Yes.
So what are you studying this time?
Currently, I am doing my honors in communication studies at the Namibia University of Science and Technology, and this is my final year. So fingers crossed that next year, April, we are itching graduation.
It will be,
hopefully,
definitely.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're also the co-founder of Frankly Speaking, and this movement or initiative, whatever you'd like to call it, has really made a name for itself, within the creative entertainment circles as far as poetry and what do they call it, spoken word is concerned. Talk to us about Frankly Speaking.
So Frankly Speaking is a poetry show that was started October 30th, 2020. So it was started during COVID. And our very first show was at the NBC studio in Windhoek North, Windhoek West. I don't know which one is which. Started by myself and Franklin Chitaleni. So I would like to say that it is one of the best poetry shows currently in the country. Don't come for me.
I think it's the only.
We'll go with only. You didn't say only, guys. We're going with only.
The only one I know of.
But during COVID, I think everybody that's a performer and it's a creative at heart, they found it very difficult to sit at home during lockdown. So Franklin and I were like, you know what, why not, because we miss being on stage and miss performing, why don't we start a poetry show? Let's see who come. So our first show actually had, I think, over 40 people, which was a big surprise to us, because we're like, oh, so people actually love poetry like this. And I think...
And this was in person?
Yes, this was in person, face to face. We were doing it wasn't 2 meters, but...
We were social distancing.
There was social distancing. Please don't come for me. There was social distancing, and that first one, I really, really loved the turnout. And since then, this is our third year now, and our third birthday is going to be in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, 3 months' time, if I'm not mistaken. But what we do that I like to mention about Frankly Speaking is, so we have 3 initiatives under Frankly Speaking. It's the live performance show that happens every month, and then we have a show on National FM every Monday between 9 and 11. And our biggest audience for this show is actually, surprisingly, is actually people from the correctional facility. So prisoners, we've had letters from people in the prison that write to us like, no, we enjoy your show, and they write poetry to the show. There's actually a poem about you that somebody wrote. You should read it. I feel like you should read it.
Thank you.
It's very nice. And I think and our third initiative is we work with high school students, or learners to say, and we teach poetry. Currently we are busy at Windhoek High School.
How do you teach poetry?
That's
I think it's one of those things that you have, you don't. You need gift of the gab or something that you have and you don't have. Tell me how you would teach poetry.
It does go, because I also used to say, when people would ask me, no, can you teach me to be a writer? And I'm like, I don't necessarily think you can teach writing, because sometimes it's really something you are born with. But with poetry is, so the first thing that we do is we ask who's interested in poetry. So we don't just throw in and every other person comes. So anybody that's interested in poetry, we take those learners, and then what we do is to sit down with them, and then they can write. So we give them free space to write about whatever it is they want to write. Sometimes we give them themes to write about, but what we like is they would write their own poetry, and then they would bring us the poetry, and then we take it from there. No, here it's better you do this. Yeah, so it's more critiquing per se, but the Windhoek High School, that was our first initiative. It actually grown, so now we have St. Paul's and Jacob Marenga, as well as Aishipena.
Fantastic. Look at you guys.
Speaking in a nutshell.
That's very nice.
Thank you so much.
You mentioned earlier that you love how wide and I suppose eclectic and colorful the creative umbrella has become, and how much you resonate with it. So of all the creative disciplines that there are, Frieda, why poetry?
You know, if I have to tell you why I started writing poetry, it's actually a very funny story. Because there are 2 parts. One, I really, and it sounds very cliche when I tell people about it, but I was grade 6, and I stumbled on this poetry book. I was cleaning an English class, and I loved the poetry, but I was like, maybe I'm not a writer. And then I went to high school, and there was this guy. He's like, no, there's this girl that I really like, man. Can you write me something? Because I was good at English. Right. So can you write me something? And then I started writing, and I was like, okay, I'm actually very good at this. And then more people started coming. So basically it started as a business in high school for men who wanted to write poetry to women, especially Valentine's Day and birthdays. So I capitalized on that, and then I realized I'm actually really good at this, so I went with it. And I came to university, and then I got exposed to avenues like spoken word Namibia. Sadly, it sort of died out, but spoken word Namibia, and then also studying literature, I figured this is actually where my niche is, and I love it.
Speaking of capitalizing on and monetizing your skill, your art, your art form, when it comes to the Namibian sort of landscape, what does the current and future status quo look like for poets in the country? What opportunities exist for this art form?
Currently, I really appreciate the different avenues that are there for poetry. Apart from Frankly Speaking, there are actually some poetry shows that happen in Windhoek. I think being on social media will expose you to those. But I also appreciate the fact that poetry in the written form is very much appreciated, because we have platforms like the Duke magazine, literary magazine. They cater to poets who want to be published. If you are an aspiring published poet, so to say, or rather author, they are very a good platform for you to start. And the other thing, I really believe you can live off poetry, but don't take it from me, really. I think as far as poetry goes in the creative industry, it's still, I would like to say it's a toddler. because not a lot of people like to invite poetry as part of the entertainment, even though it's slightly picking up in such avenues. Like mostly one of the poets that we have under Frankly Speaking is Officially Poetic. He recently performed at an event hosted by Flom, so slowly it is picking up. So if you are a poet, an aspiring poet, I would say maybe make it a side hustle kind of thing, but it does pay. It really does pay if you take your craft seriously and you put yourself out there. It does pay.
It seems like your story is sort of very much where your inspiration came from. Where you said it was started out as a business, but I'm sure as you uncovered you had a talent and a knack for this. You probably went in search of what poetry is, what type of poetry you like, what resonates with you. Are there any poets that stood out to you, poetry of theirs that you read that really inspired you?
I think when I discovered that I'm good at writing poetry or being a poet, I just took it as a normal talent that, okay, fine, this is a talent that I have. I think I just need to better it. But when I came to Windhoek, I got exposed to spoken word Namibia and other platforms. I also sort of became really exposed to the internet. But I didn't really have a lot of poets that I would look up to. But there's one YouTube guy I used to really listen to, Sully Breaks. His was mostly on youth education, youth empowerment, and he was very much big on education, but as opposed to it being a Western concept. So anything African is mostly what I was very interested in. And then obviously I got exposed to Namibian poets, and most of them, funny enough, I really love women poets because they sort of have the same line of poetry that I do. Nesindana Namises, she's brilliant. I love Patrick Starr, she's totally brilliant. But as time goes, I think poets under Frankly Speaking, they really do it for me. Yes.
Well, before they cut us off with time, Frieda, you've got a special piece.
I do have a piece.
I do have a piece this evening, so I want to give you the opportunity to do that real quick. Thank you.
All right, no problem. So with the piece, I just recently wrote it, so please do forgive me. I'm gonna be reading a little bit, and I decided to sort of cut it a little bit. It's also on women issues, more or less celebrating women, but let me just find it. All right.
And what have you titled it?
It doesn't have a title yet. Maybe you can help me find a title towards the end of it. So it was a bit long, so I just sort of made it a bit shorter.
All right.
Yes. They said feminism never existed in the Shivambo culture. Yet there are a lot of known women who left husbands and now own umbo. Koko umbo kankwa nangobe. They speak it among themselves as to say these are unknown things by the women who defied culture and tradition, shoved a middle finger in their children through a lot of men only to not marry any of them. They discuss the worth of women now, preaching that we stay in marriages because our mothers did so. I've been raised by women who snatch speech and ignorance from the throats of men, women whose charms have erased the existence of patriarchy through resistance and fight. Women whose ululating has changed the narrative of madness in African women. Women who showed me that you are worthy even without a man by your side, you're just nature's sisters. I've been raised by women who have gathered strength to raise an army of abandoned men. Women who have healed two separate men in one setting. Their husbands when they went to war, and then their husbands' corpse when they returned. I've also been raised by women who have had to learn how to pronounce English names of their husbands' other children when the husband returned from Ushimba, or rather the city that is fertile. Women who have become patient with their husband's infidelity, saw them when they became one with their sadness and retaliation in the form of madness. That's a shorter version of it. Thank you. I like that you do it. Yeah. You know, the one rule we have in poetry is when you go to an event, you don't clap.
I know, that's what I'm teaching my audience.
Nina is up to.
So this is how you clap when
that's how you do it.
It's really good. I like that. Your poetry is very raw and it speaks to, current issues. I think a lot of people can relate.
Yes.
You just say it as it is.
I do. I think that's one thing people probably love my poetry because I don't shy away from putting things as they are because why?
Gone are the days of roses are red and violets are blue. That was Frieda Etuhole, local poetess, speaking to us, a poetess speaking to us this evening. She's our Woman Crush Wednesday. That wraps up today's edition of the Daily Roundup with Nina. We're back tomorrow, same time and place. From